Okay, so yeah, hello. Right, everyone take their seats. We might as well get going. Terribly sorry if any of you who've been here the last couple of days. We continue to apologise for the backing music. Has nothing to do with us, but we'll speak over it, and hopefully when you have the microphones, if you can all just project, we'll manage to get through. Hi, good morning. Thank you for fighting your way through 2 days of conference. Join us at this hour of the morning. I am Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home. Thank you for joining us in this event in collaboration with the Federation of Master Builders and the Chartered Institute of, Building. There we go. It's 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Thank you. The subject we are discussing is the importance of retrofitting, not only to meeting the UK's carbon requirements, but also in the context of the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine, in keeping down energy bills and helping to improve public health. It's a vitally important topic. Here to explore it with me today is our panel. We have Brian Berry, the Chief Executive of the FMB, Sandy Rhys Jones, Senior Vice President of the CIOB, Juliet Phillips, Senior Policy Advisor to E3G, and we will, I'm sure, have Paul Scully MP, Minister of State at the Department for Levelling Up. He is taking the ministerial prerogative to visit as and when circumstances allow, but he will materialise at some point. I hope we will give him a warm welcome when he does. Usual format, we will have some brief opening remarks from the panel, after which we will go to questions. There will be 2 microphones circulating. I'll take questions 2 at a time. I'll go through the housekeeping for that when we get to it. But without further ado, Brian.
Thank you, Henry. So I'm Brian Berry, Chief Executive, Federation of Master Builders. We're a trade body for small building companies all across the UK. And it seems quite appropriate that we're talking about retrofit, because one of the benefits of retrofit, of course, is noise insulation. So this would be quite apt if we could do a bit of retrofit on our marquee this morning. But it's a very topical subject, of course, and it's been interesting to see that retrofitting has been discussed across the political spectrum. And that's important because we've got 29 million homes in this country, the vast majority of which need to be improved in terms of their energy efficiency. We've got the oldest and leakiest housing stock in Europe. And in this country, although we're fortunate to have a very rich and varied housing stock, 39% of that was built before 1939. And the impact of that on people, of course, is that many are living in fuel poverty because of the cost of heating their homes. And that's become actually much more critical now with the increase in energy bills over the coming months. Even in 2019, there were reported 10,000 deaths because of people living in poorly heated homes. And of course, if we were going to meet our climate change obligation of zero carbon by 2050, we need to tackle our existing homes because 20% of CO2 comes from our housing stock. And given that 85% of our existing homes will be still standing in 2050, we've got a real challenge if we're going to reduce CO2 emissions. So what we need is to have a green revolution. And I think actually when we're talking about the 29 million homes, we should regard it as a major infrastructure project. And there are great opportunities there for builders who I think should be at the heart of the green revolution. We know from independent research carried out a few years ago now that the market for small builders is worth between £3.5 and £6.5 billion a year. So why hasn't it happened? I mean, this is a great opportunity to transform our housing stock. And I would argue that there has been an absence of political will across the political spectrum. What we have seen, of course, is a number of piecemeal initiatives over recent years. The Green Deal under the coalition government, and more recently, the Green Homes Grant Scheme. And these initiatives have come and gone, which have created a lot of business uncertainty. What we need is clear and accurate information for consumers. We also need to address the lack of financial incentives. And within our industry, of course, it's very fragmented because anyone can call themselves a builder. How can you be sure that the person doing the work is actually competent to carry out a retrofit project? And then you add on top the skills crisis in this country, because even before the pandemic, there was a shortage of skilled tradespeople, carpenters, bricklayers, all in short supply, and that has continued right up to the current time. So what can we do? What's the answer? Well, the FMB has been working with the Construction Leadership Council to develop a national retrofit strategy, which essentially is a long-term plan over 20 years to transform our building stock. And we're aware of the political dimension. We've broken that down into 4 phases. And the first phase was calling for investment of £5.3 billion, which would result in 100,000 extra jobs. It would lead to the NHS saving £1.4 billion and £403 saving on energy bills. And critically, what we said actually it should be fabric first. Because what we have seen with some of the recent initiatives is the emphasis on heat pumps. Fantastic, but they need to be placed in energy efficient homes that have been properly insulated. So essentially, what we need to think about in terms of delivery is, one, we need to get consumers to be better informed, better information. We're calling for a building passport for every home in this country, so allow homeowners to upgrade their homes over a period of time. There does need to be a series of financial incentives, such as a cut in VAT, stamp duty, council tax, to kickstart the retrofit market. Thirdly, there needs to be an emphasis on skills. We need to upskill, provide capacity in the building industry. There needs to be a retrofit skills strategy. And fourthly, we need to make sure there are standards to make sure that actually everything's done to the correct level. So, we feel that actually one of the benefits of the retrofit is the creation of jobs. The FMB is linked up with the IPPR, and research has shown that actually the benefits of retrofit would create an extra 14% of new jobs in key constituencies in the north of England. Because the benefit, of course, is every village, every town, every city is going to benefit from new jobs as a result of retrofit. So, to me, it's a no-brainer in terms of policy. Retrofit would tackle the need to reduce CO2 emissions. It would actually improve people's lives by reducing their energy bills, and also it would create much-needed jobs in every constituency across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Brian, and thank you for attending. I've got a quick question for you, because I like to know who I'm talking with or talking to. Who's a builder? We have not a single builder in the room. How interesting. Who's a client? Good, that's a start. Who's a politician? So who are the rest of you? That's very interesting.
Ordinary Conservative Party members. The conference is all about.
That's what it's all about. But they have other lives. I'd like to pick up some of the points that Brian has made, specifically on the issue of skills. And I've been in the industry for a very long time, and we've had numerous reports on how to improve performance. And what we often come back down to is that the construction industry is a very convenient economic regulator. So we have peaks and troughs. And one of the problems with the peaks and troughs is making sure you have the right number of people to do the work that's guaranteed to arrive. And this ties very neatly, I would say, into Brian's membership, which are the SMEs. And we have an industry that's shaped like a pyramid with some very large companies at the top, but then along the base, many, many small and medium-sized businesses. And one way to maintain a good, secure workload is to balance new build with repair and maintenance and retrofit. And as Brian says, we should be fixing the large number of homes we've got to make them fit for purpose. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be building new ones, but let's improve the ones we've got. Skills. Now, Chartered Institute of Building is based on competency and professionalism. So it's standards and competencies and skills. And one of the things I think people don't quite realise about our construction industry is that you can come into it at all different points, and you can upgrade your skills by undertaking more and more professional qualifications. So you can begin at site, and then you can progress and become competent in retrofit or maintenance, and then can give the reassurance of competency and professionalism. But where are these people? We have an acute skill shortage. We have colleges that actually found it was much cheaper to train 4 times as many hairdressers as it was to train bricklayers. So we had a sudden strangling of how we get people into the industry who we need. But on the plus side, we have younger people in this country who are passionate about sustainability and the environment. So we can convert that desire to say you can make a difference by following your sustainability and environmental issues and do something, because providing work is giving people a new purpose in life. I was involved in a project some years ago where we were trying to figure out how we could get contractors to tick the diversity and inclusion box in a practical way. So I actually shut up in a room registered social landlords, housing associations and contractors and said, try and find a practical way to do this, not just ticking a box. And we ended up by training housing association tenants in basic DIY and maintenance. They had a sense of purpose. The contractor provided the training and could tick the box in a very practical way. And the client, the housing association, was able to deal with one of those issues that was costing money. So there are creative solutions to this that not only improve our housing stock, but actually provide jobs and a sense of achievement and management of the budget. So what do we need? As I said, we need more people. There's a chronic shortage in the retrofit sector, but we also need the confidence that those people are competent, and as Brian says, you know the job has been done well. There's a very interesting example in Wales. Wales, an interesting example of how the devolved nations are getting on with creative ideas. And they've introduced a GCSE in the built environment. That's the sort of thing we ought to be doing, and then working with employers and owners and contractors. We need to sort out what we've got, and that's the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say a couple of words? Or?
Thanks, yes. My name's Juliet Phillips. I'm a senior policy advisor at E3G, which I know sounds a bit like a phone company, but we're actually an independent energy think tank. We work very closely with stakeholders across the heat and energy efficiency value chain, including through the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group and Electrify Heat. And I thought I'd start by just thinking about the scale of the challenge we face and building on some of the remarks made earlier. So as we know, the scope and scale of this are very significant. We've got some of the coldest and leakiest buildings in Western Europe, and around 85% of our homes are connected to the gas grid. So the scale of the retrofit challenge is very significant and also closely linked to the levelling up agenda. As we know, the most inefficient homes are in the most deprived areas, so they're also having to pay more for their bills. Kind of related, I suppose, is the amount of finance we're going to need to address this challenge. The Climate Change Committee estimates that 360 billion will be needed by 2050 to retrofit all homes and buildings in this country. And whilst the economics of energy efficiency and heat pumps have never been better before, given high energy prices, for those on low incomes, it's still very hard to access the finance. So again, very closely related to the levelling up agenda. But throwing money at this problem isn't enough. We also really need to think about the nuts and bolts of delivery. Skills and supply chains is a really important part of this. We hear lots of stories about people who, even when they do want to retrofit their homes, they can't find installers in their area. They're not sure who they can trust because of the issues around standards and consumer protection. So this is a really important area as well. I just wanted to think a bit about the government's track record to date, and I thought I'd use a traffic light system to do so. So Green for Go, I think we've got some really good existing schemes in the country, which we might need to fine-tune a few bits and bobs within them, but I think we can be proud of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Scheme, the Green Homes Grant, Local Authority Delivery Fund. There's lots of good skills and supply chains out there which can be built upon. And I think also we can really welcome the extra £1 billion given to expand the energy company obligation in the mini budget. In terms of Orange, I think there's a bit of concern around the stalling on some of the regulations which were put out in the heat and building strategy. For example, we're still waiting for the response to the private rented sector consultation on increasing minimum energy efficiency standards. And there's a big question around what's going to happen for owner-occupiers who represent the biggest chunk of the market. And if we're going to get on track for retrofitting homes, we really need that long-term certainty across both of those housing tenures. In terms of red, areas where I think we could see a bit more ambition, I think in general, in response to the gas crisis, there's been an oversight in terms of those demand-side measures which can really cut bills straight away. There's been a big focus on things like fracking and nuclear, which are the big, shiny, exciting projects, but compared to energy efficiency, won't be reducing anyone's bills this winter. And there's been no public information about how people can take simple steps to reduce energy use in their homes. So I think that's an area where I'd love to see more ambition. In terms of what's needed, there's no silver bullet here. It's a challenging problem. We need a whole ecosystem of measures to get on track. I think finance is going to be absolutely key. We're going to need large amounts of public finance for those on low incomes, but also private and blended finance. And we heard talking about incentives, so we're really supporting the energy saving stamp duty as one, but also thinking about how the UK Infrastructure Bank can also use its significant capital to support households, but also social housing funds and things like that as well. On the skills and supply chains, we've been talking closely to installers, unions, engineers, plumbers and everyone else to hear what they think's needed to strike the supercharging of supply chains we need across the country. And as well as that long-term certainty, there's been a call for an Olympic-style retrofit task force. So in the same way, other major infrastructure projects like Crossrail, like the Olympics, we've seen the government put a big focus on getting skills and supply chains up to speed. We think that retrofit demands that same attention, and we'd love to see the government sitting down with industry and really thinking through those career pathways and thinking about how we can incentivise young people to get into the market and people to retrain and upskill as well. On the heat pump side, I think it's slightly more challenging. We need to see it as part of the transition of heating more generally, thinking about how we can support existing gas engineers to have these bolt-ons so they can also support heat pumps, thinking about how we can get more young people into the market. As mentioned earlier, there is a lot of interest from young people to get involved in this green opportunity, but making sure that skills in colleges are really advertising those and pushing them out. And also, I think, an opportunity to think about gender diversity, because this sector is generally fairly dominated by men, and I think the net zero transition could be a really exciting opportunity to get more females involved as well. So there's a really cool company called Your Energy, Your Way, who are trying to encourage more females to get in. They want to create a cohort of female engineers working on heat pumps and paying them a really decent wage as well, so it's seen as attractive. And I think that's a really good opportunity for levelling up. And I'll wrap up there. I think in sum, it's a really good opportunity for levelling up if we get it also right for workers and consumers.
Thank you very much. We now have assembled our complete panel, so we're at full power and ready to go. I will be throwing out the opening floor to questions in a minute, but just before I do, I'm going to usurp Chair's prerogative to ask a couple myself. And I'm going to start with you, Brian. So we hear a lot about, and having done other housing panels over the last few days, we've heard a lot about the UK's, old housing stock, very leaky housing stock. But is there where internationally or even in the UK is doing well at this? Where could the government look for examples of places that have addressed this gender properly? And we'll just sort of move down if anyone else wants to comment about.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because actually we need to be looking at other European countries which I think have been ahead of us in terms of retrofitting, Scandinavian countries. But of course, their living climate's very different there. But we need to draw on that, and I've been talking to other bodies like where research has been carried out, because we need to draw on those examples and compare. I don't think we've done a lot of analysis in this country and fed that into our policy making. So it's a very fair question, I think, what we can do in terms of learning from that. But we have got our own unique problems because of the richness of our housing stock, where I said 39% were built before 1939. So that means it's much more complex than other European countries.
Okay, and I should just say to the panellists, if anyone wants to... Absolutely.
I think Germany's got a really interesting example with the KfW, which is their development bank, so some lessons which can be learned for the UK Infrastructure Bank, where they give a concessional loan, so people are given a loan element to this, but also a subsidy, and the more ambitious their retrofits, the more subsidy they get. So people are encouraged to do whole house retrofits, and it's got benefits for the environment, but also the economics, and it pays for itself. So the VAT revenues deliver something like 6 times the amount of public spending put in. So it's a real great option to take forward. And I think Home Energy Scotland as well is something we could see rolled out across the rest of the UK. This is in-person advice, and I think that's something people don't just want to read it online. They want to go in, talk to people, and hear what the right steps are for their property.
Yes, I'd like to add to that. I think there are lots of examples internationally, in Europe and in other places. And interestingly, thinking about the word retrofit, if we think of retrofit and regeneration, historic preservation, we ran at CIOB a few months ago a conservation conference, and the really important point that came across, it's not just a question of preserving some ancient pile for somebody to trot round and say, wasn't it interesting that they built this like this in the 18th century? What became quite apparent was the way some buildings were built, particularly in the Mediterranean, in times gone by, make a heck of a lot of sense for us now because our climate has changed. So traditional ways of building and constructing and the use of tiles on roofs and how you actually design your buildings, which are historically interesting, are very, very relevant for how we manage our housing stock now. So it's not just retrofit, it's how did they get this right before and what can we learn from it? And we're running a study tour to Malta to look at this combination of how you sustain what you've got and how you learn from these particular initiatives. So there's some interesting work there that we can learn from.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Sorry I'm late. It's obviously 9:45 is when Steve Bray's finished his Wetherspoon breakfast, sort of the soundtrack that's outside at the moment. But it's really interesting that we should be looking at international examples. We know that we need to retrofit, that you can never do it quickly enough for the reasons that have been said. We're moving towards a future home standard, so to make sure that new homes have got less than 75% lower emissions than, was it 2015? I think it's only 16. That sort of time. But clearly, I'm sure you said before I got here, that the number of homes that need to be retrofitted. But information, I think, is really crucial, as we've said. They will be the two big things that we can lean in on whilst we are retrofitting, in particular, social housing and working with local authorities to be able to do that. But you talked about heat pumps, and I think heat pump boilers still very expensive. What we've done when I was in Bays before I moved over to local government is Kwasi, when he was energy minister, produced the hydrogen strategy, the building strategy as well, to start to direct to markets what we're aiming to do over the next 10-20 years, to give them the confidence to know that we're in this for the long term, and that drives down costs because you bring in innovation, you bring in more players in the field, and it will be technology that starts to drive down costs. What we've got to realise and remember when we are driving towards net zero, all of the stuff we're talking about energy generation, is a transition. We're not trying to get to net zero tomorrow, we're trying to get it done by 2050. But clearly we need to take people with us. If we can support the people on the lowest paid, as you say, through retrofitting, social housing in particular, then that's all well and good. But we do need that information that you rightly cited to get to other people so that they can provide their own retrofitting as well.
Thank you. And the other question I'm going to direct this to the Minister is, in your experience, has the importance of this cut through to the public yet? Because sometimes we had one of the speakers already saying it tends to lose out to more eye-catching projects. Has it cut through to politicians and the public? And if not, what more needs to be done to get that message out?
To be fair, I think it's cut through to the politicians. I'm not sure it has cut through to the public yet, actually, because every debate around net zero always drives around energy generation. It talks about the kind of boilers you're going to have in your homes, rather than the simple things that you can do, comparatively simple things that you can do immediately to cut your bills. And obviously, the times we're living in, with the energy price support that we're having to give, £60 billion worth of support, the more we can be informing people, educating people, and really getting that cut through of retrofitting, then the less they will need that support. So it has to go, retrofitting has to go hand in glove with new ways of energy generation.
Okay, certainly. Right, so now we're going to throw open the floor. A couple of housekeeping things. First of all, no statements. You all know it. You've all heard it before. I really mean it. No statements. Second, short questions, please. We have a very interesting panel. There's a lot of people who want to speak. Please don't preempt your question with a long, so I'll have to start talking over you. It'll be so awkward. So, with that said, there are two microphones. We're going to take the gentleman in the front row who waited for me to call him yesterday and we ran out of time. And we'll take the gentleman in the second row over there. Please also state your name and where you're from.
Hi, Ben Flatman from Building Design. I just had a question about the skills bottleneck, and I really found the ideas put forward interesting, but obviously they're going to take a while to come through. So what's the immediate solution to addressing the skills shortage?
Model question, thank you, sir.
Greg Sinclair, councillor in Telford. Why is the government still allowing houses to be built which are not 100% heat-proof?
Another model question, excellent. Thank you. We start with Juliet and we'll work up the panel and then we'll just vary the batting order each time.
Yeah, I guess on the first question, totally agree. We can't press a button and train everyone up overnight. And I think it's really important from a standards perspective as well that we are taking the time to do this properly. So I think even people who are asking for a lot more ambition do recognise that this needs to be something sustainable. We're in it for the long run. For net zero, as mentioned earlier, it's about that long-term transition. So I think where the quick wins are, I mean, yeah, of course, there's lots of things people can do tomorrow. They can go out and buy simple things to reduce their energy bills. In terms of the skill side, I think we need to really get started on building those existing supply chains, working with existing businesses, and working out where there are opportunities to do things quickly. On the new homes point, I think it's such a frustration. Like, this should have happened 10 years ago. We shouldn't still be waiting around. I mean, cynically, you might say there's some powerful interests who, influencing government who don't necessarily want to reduce or increase the costs associated with more sustainable homes. So I think that might be one potential route, but interested to hear what others think as well about the delays.
On the skill shortage, and this has gone on for so long, it's very frustrating. I think, though, one of the issues that's come through COVID and lockdown is the realisation that it is actually possible to work in construction as well as other industries in a flexible way. So I'm suggesting that it might be possible now to be realistic about getting back into the workplace those people, like women with kids, like other people who can actually work more flexibly, so you can expand that. Because for years it said, working in construction, you start at 8 in the morning, you do 6 days a week, and it's quite difficult there to fit it in. And I think there's been a change there. I think we also need to look at pools of people. There have been a number of initiatives over the years working with NEETs, not in education, employment or training. The big challenge there was, dare I say it, Minister, a lack of joined-up government thinking and working between the three different ministries involved in the industry, training and education, and employment. And we really need, and there are models there sitting, waiting to be implemented. So we need to identify people who would welcome being trained up and then doing that as an interim, and also making it possible for those who may have lost the industry to come back and work differently.
Look, I think in terms of skills, there's a wider skill shortage in a number of areas, not just in retrofitting that we need to tackle. But I suppose we've brought in the lifetime skills guarantee to allow people to go through that haven't got A-level qualifications to date to go through a number of qualifications. There's a pot of money there for them, including environmental qualifications. And T-levels as well. So it's going to start to bring, if we can make sure that, again, we are pushing those qualifications in particular in this area forward to people as a viable career option to them, then they'll be more attracted to go down that line so that we can quickly train people up through those qualifications. You'll be hearing more about the workforce and the measures to make the workforce in general more productive when Kwasi Kwarteng does his second bit, if you like, of our plan for growth. But why don't we make homes 100% carbon neutral? I suppose you have to have the transition, you have to have the skills, you have to have the ability to actually do that on scale. If we're a government in a hurry, we know we want the supply of new homes. You've got to do it quickly, but having an airtight home, frankly, comes with its own issues around which you need to work through so that you can do it on scale. And I'm not sure we're quite there yet, which is why, as I said, the Future Home Standard is kicking in shortly, but not immediately.
Yeah, so we know there's a skill shortage. We know that actually we're not able to recruit enough people. But one of the benefits of the retrofit market is that we create lots of new jobs that would be attractive to women and people who have traditionally not come into our industry, which is why I think it's so critical. We do have that certainty, a commitment to develop the retrofit market. And business will invest, because we know from the research we've done it's a market that's worth billions of pounds, but industry needs certainty from government that there's a long-term approach, not a start-stop approach, as we've seen with the Green Deal and the Green Homes Grant Scheme. The issue about new homes, I agree, it's a nonsense to be building homes which then have to be retrofitted. And you're right, Minister, we've got the Future Home Standard coming in, but at the moment we are still building homes that will need to be retrofitted, and that doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. So if we can once again have a show of hands, we will have the lady in the second row there and the gentleman in the first row there. Thank you. Microphones are on their way.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kate Henderson from the National Housing Federation. Paul, really welcome your comments there about the role of social housing and the recent announcement of the next wave of funding from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. Needs to benefit all tenures, actually. So there's a big opportunity with social housing to be market makers, but really importantly to get the skills, supply chains, but consumer confidence. So firstly, an offer to come out and see some of the work we're doing. There's some really, really good, so there are really good examples here. Question is, our members who are doing retrofit work are getting quite an inconsistent response from their local authority partners. So there's some great collaboration happening, but when it comes to planning, you can be in one street and the different homes can have a different planning consent. So is there something we can do with you to enable the planning system to support this more?
Thank you.
Good morning, James Wright from Cooperatives UK. I've had a lot of admiration for the Republic of Ireland's home retrofit programme, particularly their use of community one-stop shops that engage households, provide them with trusted advice, referrals to accredited tradespeople, that sort of thing. Are these community one-stop shops a solution we could adopt in the UK?
Thank you very much. We'll vary the batting, so we'll start with Brian and work backwards. On either question, you can just ask either answer or both.
Well, on Kate's question about social housing, I agree. About any inconsistencies, there's a wider issue there about the planning system generally affecting small developers. So anything that can be done to speed that up, as you know, as part of your planning reforms, which you've announced. So that's definitely a special plea there. The example in Ireland, again, is another example which we should be looking at in this country. Anything that joins it all up. I mean, I've been stressing the need for linking up consumer information with the capacity in the supply chain, with the financial incentives. We need to put all this together, which is why I think a strategy of some sort, some form of coordination is important, because what we've seen so far is initiatives that have supported financial incentives but not capacity. Or we're focusing on capacity and not got the financial incentives. And that's important because owner-occupiers have really been left out in the heat and building strategy. The only incentive for a homeowner is the ripping out your gas boiler, but that's limited to a very few owner-occupiers. Social housing, there's funding, there's requirements in the PRS, the private renter sector, to upgrade homes to level C, but for the average homeowner, there's hardly no help. So that's where I think we need to be looking at financial incentives.
Yeah, let me take the social housing. I'd love to come and see some examples. If it's not me, it'll be Lee Bowley. One of us will, come, because we do need to see what good looks like. Frankly, happy to do that. In terms of planning consent, as Brian said, we're very much looking at planning reform at the moment, how we can streamline the system, but also make it coherent as well, to try and get out of those oddities. So if you've got some specifics, I'd love to actually, it is Lee, so I'll pass it over to Lee, but I'm happy to be the post boy.
I'd like to pick out 3 C's, really. I think there's a huge need for clarity. I think some of the stuff that's talked about, or if you try and investigate how you could, whether you're an independent homeowner, whether you're a tenant, whether you're a fitter, is what exactly are we talking about here? We need more clarity on what you need to do, because some of it's pretty murky. We need consistency, which ties in with the planning point that you've just made, and also know that if this is going to work, this is what's going to stick. And then the 3rd C, of course, is cost. And I think we need more clarity on that. I'd like to pick up the one-stop shop, which I think is really very powerful. In my area, there is a very active group that's looking at a whole range of environmental and sustainable issues. And they've set up a link for solar panel installation, how heat pumps actually work, the difference between an air source heat pump and a ground source heat pump, and all that stuff. When you think, you have a conversation with somebody and say, well, it won't work for you because you'll need such enormous radiators, it's not. All that stuff, which is perhaps familiar to us in the industry, but is just gobbledygook to the person out there. And the one-stop shop provides clarity, consistency, and it also has a list of certified and accredited people. And that's a small town village in the countryside. There's a model there, but it's clarity, consistency, and cost. If we know where we are on that, then we begin to get some action.
Yeah, to make it a bit boring, totally agree on the one-stop shop. I think also, just to emphasise, the return on investment for the government would be huge here. We could spur so much private investment with just quite a small upfront amount invested in that advice and information. So I think it's an absolute no-brainer for the government to invest in one-stop shops. I think just briefly on Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, as well as many of the other government funds, just linking it back to the levelling up agenda, I think there's a bit of a challenge with the way that these pots of funding are offered on a competitive basis, because it's often those local authorities who are already quite competent, quite switched on, able to access and win those grants. And I think there's a challenge. It becomes a bit of a postcode lottery. So if you're not living in one of those areas which has got that funding, then you might not be reaping the benefits, which I'm not sure how well that sits with the levelling up agenda, really. So would definitely encourage more thinking around capacity building at a local authority level. And again, not to keep banging on about the UK Infrastructure Bank, but I think there's really good opportunities here to make sure that bank's really kind of funneling its economic power behind those deprived areas.
Minister, I just want to come back to you on that question of how do you make sure that councils receive cash equitably? Because, as you say, that was a real problem. If you're already getting the good councils, which then are best able to get the money, and they become better councils.
I think actually it is exactly as you say. It's capacity building. You're absolutely right. So it's what we need to do. The whole point about devolution, about having largely unring-fenced budgets, but these sort of things it is bidding in, is to make sure that the local authorities are capable of taking that and making the most of it. There's plenty more work that we need to do in that area.
Okay. Thank you very much. Show of hands again, please. We'll have the lady at the back there and the gentleman standing by the door over there, please. Microphones are on their way.
Hello, I'm Sarah from the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group, but I also represent the non-combustible insulation manufacturers. I totally agree with everyone on the panel. We have the solutions. We also have solutions that don't cost, which at the moment the government is not focusing on. They're focusing on the supply side. But what really underpins this, and I really want to hear the Minister's view on this, is a sustainable market, to create that market, because we don't have that market at the moment. And we also need to ensure we have a resilient supply chain. And policy so far has not created that. I'm not making a statement. I would like to hear from the Minister about how government actually proposes to bridge that, because we're all ready and waiting to do it from a manufacturer's perspective, from the installers, etc. But government really needs to engage us on this.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Thank you. Mike Leonard from Birmingham City University, where we're doing an awful lot of work around this space at the moment. And I would agree with the Minister that there is a need for a transition. We built with Midland Heart here in the Midlands in Handsworth 12 houses that are now being lived in, so we can actually understand how a future home standard house works and all the things that we need to consider from a consumer perspective. So that's really important. My question is, going back to retrofit, if I may, because that's the big prize, clearly. How do we make sure that this market that we create isn't then inherited by the cowboys, together with their dodgy interventions? We saw ECO seeing EWI, for instance, having to be taken off houses a year after it had been put on. So how do we make sure the right interventions? And my plea is ventilation, because everything we do changes the dynamics of a building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I suppose we should start with the Minister and then go to Brian, or would you like to come in first, Brian?
I don't.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
we'll go.
Okay. Well, Mike, you're absolutely right to flag that issue about who's going to do the work, because one thing that always concerns me, that in this country anyone can call themselves a builder. So there's no registration or licensing of builders in this country. But with respect to the retrofit, there is the standard, the PAS 2035 standard, which sets the benchmark. So we need to ensure that installers meet that or some equivalent of that PAS 2035, because there is an army of builders who could easily upskill. And I know that some of them find the PAS 25 rather exacting, but we need to actually capture their experience. So there needs to be some form of accreditation. And the government's body, Trustmark, has been looking at the idea of this Licence Plus. So we are engaging with Trustmark on that, because we do need to ensure there are standards and competency to do the work. Otherwise, it could be a bit of a disaster with faulty homes. And then the first question, the bit about ventilation as well, I think is really important, particularly for older properties. You can't just seal them up. You've got to ensure that they can breathe, and that's been a mistake over the years. And then, Sarah, your point about a sustainable market, absolutely. We could have done this years ago. Really, really could have done. But this stop-start approach to policy making, I'm sorry to say this, but we do need long-term thinking, and also across the political spectrum. It's a national interest. That's why I've been saying the retrofit project, people talk about homes on the periphery. It should be a major infrastructure project and treated as such. And that would give you the certainty to produce your materials. It will give my members the certainty to actually deliver. It would give consumers the certainty to invest. Without that, nothing gets done. We need to join up the dots.
Did you say no cost or low cost? Right, fantastic. Well, there's your opening line for approaching government. That's how to engage government. But look, Brian's absolutely right in terms of that sustainability, and I think government in general is not particularly good at long-term projects. It's it works in cycles. Funnily enough, usually election cycles. But I mean, because there are lots of people that say, well, I'm not going to be around to see the end of it. So what can I do now to put a pin in something? So. Please do come, see what we can do to engage in that. And in terms of, I think Brian's covered what I was going to say about Trustmark and about using Trustmark more. Things with PAS 25 is an interesting one, because we use PAS on a number of other safety and trust issues as well. It's hardly a sexy title, but we actually need to make sure, yes, the installers are meeting PAS 25, but also make sure that the people who are living in those homes actually know what they're looking for in terms of what accreditation, a good accredited installer looks like. And yeah, the ventilation piece that you were talking about was exactly what I was saying when I was talking about the 100% moving towards 100% carbon neutral. It's that move towards it. But good point.
Thank you. I'd like to say right away that we're a chartered institute, so we are absolutely embedded in competency. If you're a chartered construction manager, it's an assurance that you have achieved a level of competence. The important thing that we've been really focusing on in the institute for some time is making it clear that you can progress through a competency path from a huge variety of entry points. so that it's a competency development process for people who are starting on site, but who then can show that they have that level of competency, and it's so important. And we're working very closely, picking up the joined-up thinking. We're not sitting in an ivory tower of being a chartered institute. We're working closely with our fellow professional institutes because we have to be joined up. It's too fragmented. But we're also working closely with universities to talk about how best to deliver the courses and also learning from their experience in research and development. So we have a number of these in place to learn from each other. I think also ventilation. I can speak from experience from ventilation. I now know that you don't put a lead roof on an unventilated, warm superstructure. So there we are. I bought a house and I increased my CPD overnight. There we go. I think there is something to be done also with working with the younger people. I touched on this before, but we have a Tomorrow's Leaders group at the CIOB, and I can tell you some of the imaginative, innovative thinking that these young people bring is amazing. Reusing timber, for example, how to green city centres to make the area more sustainable. So working closely with them to bring about the ideas that you can then realise that affect people, and they feel it strongly, so we need to encourage them.
Yeah, just to really build on the existing points regarding the skills and standards, I think everyone agrees, we want to create a sustainable long-term market, and that means making sure that consumers get a really excellent experience during and after the retrofit. And we do have a host of bodies and standards that we can build upon, so Trustmark, PAS, and also MCS from a heat pump perspective. There's a number of consumer codes as well on the renewable side. I think it is worth flagging that there could be more done to bring these all together coherently, and particularly on the consumer protection, if someone does have a poor quality retrofit, to make sure there is the redress afterwards, which I think is still potentially an area which more work could be done. And also thinking about the owner able to pay, because for the government-backed schemes, they do require that PAS standard, but that's not required more generally. I know the Installation Assurance Authority and others as well are thinking about how we can create standards which are cost-effective, because we don't want people to be spending all their time filling in paperwork. That adds a lot of cost for the installer. But thinking about how we can make sure that quality can be assured. And just 100% agree with Sarah on that long-term certainty. If we are here to talk about growth and investment and spurring the private sector, then how can that be possible without that long-term certainty?
Okay, thank you very much. Show of hands again, please. We'll have the gentleman with his hand raised over there and the lady in the second row there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Ben Richards from Kingfisher, so B&Q and Screwfix in the UK. I'm interested in the panel's view on a singly tracked, government-facilitated number for the number of retrofits taking place every year. I take Brian and Sandy's point about visibility. It's the one thing, it's very hard to get across how many homes are actually being retrofitted and where the more challenging properties are, say, in rural areas or with solid walls. So I'd be interested in the panel's views on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam?
Hi, I'm Emily Wallace. I'm the Chief Exec of the Trade Association Forum, which is the trade association for trade associations, which sounds meta, but when you think about it, it makes sense. I want to ask a question about apprenticeships, because no one's talked about that yet today, and the role of apprenticeships. I was at the TICA, which is the Thermal Insulators Contractors Association's annual general meeting last week, and at their apprenticeship awards, and they're 4-year apprenticeships for what I assume are the contractors that put in place the insulation that lady's members make. It's a long lead-in time, certainly not able to do within an election cycle if you're going to build up the skills and capacity. So what is the role of apprenticeships, and how can we supercharge that and encourage young people to see an apprenticeship in the building trade as a kind of career path that they want to take?
Thank you very much. So varying the batting again, if we start with Juliet.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question on the targets. I can definitely see the benefit of setting a target. Then, industry could have something to aim for. They'll know that the government is serious about it and that they've got big aspirations. I think, for example, the heat pump target is ambitious, but it does show that direction of travel. But I think it would need to be very closely monitored and have some way of kind of tracking whether we're actually anywhere on track and some accountability around it. I mean, it's not just a kind of shiny announcement which isn't fulfilled. I think apprenticeships, yeah, I think it's an oversight. We haven't mentioned them today. Just reflecting on my conversations with the heat pump engineers and those in the gas network, I think there is a bit of concern if they're not high standard, then you might get people who aren't necessarily doing a great job, teaching more people how not to do a great job. So I think making sure that apprenticeships are really high standard and we're kind of replicating really the best practices will be really important. And yeah, I think there could be a role for the big companies as well to be investing more in this and bringing more young people in. So yeah, I agree, it's a really important area.
Oh, we have to have targets. You don't know how you're doing. I mean, I still find it absolutely breathtaking that it's been 50 years since we first started talking about loft insulation. Ye gods, we're still talking about loft insulation. We should be better than this. You're quite right, an oversight not to talk about apprenticeships. Absolutely without question, it's an obvious thing for the construction industry, and this is where I think we've got to be we've got so many good selling points here, particularly if you look at the cost of a university degree. I mean, that's almost a no-brainer. Why don't you learn and earn at the same time? I think they need to be properly managed and delivered, and there are some very good examples of good practice. But then really importantly, it's back to the progression point I made earlier, that you can start as an apprentice, but then there are a series of ways in which you can continue building on your skills and then get to this tricky word, professionalism. Now, I have difficulty with the word professional in the construction industry because for years we talked about the professionals who are the chartered surveyors or the architects and so on, and the other lot who aren't professional. And my point's always been, do you want an unprofessional plumber? We need to get a different word for this. So I think apprenticeships, a lot of sense, and we need some proper support and underpinning, but then we need to show that there is a path you can take if you wish that builds and adds. And we have endpoint assessment ability now at CIOB. And I know he wouldn't mind my saying this, but the immediate past president of the Chartered Institute of Building started on the tools. So I think we need to make that clear, that this is not a second choice opportunity. This is a really good job opportunity that you can build on in the literal sense.
Thanks very much. In terms of targets, it's not particularly my area, so there's not a lot I can say. But beyond when I was in Bays, the energy team there working on mapping the energy performance of pretty well, most of the buildings in the UK. So there's a lot of detailed work because it then does come into what Brian was saying about the different types of homes that we have in across the country. But nonetheless, actually seeing what good looks like and how you're measuring performance is very important. In terms of apprentices, I suppose again I'll look at it in a wider sense, because the first question was obviously about the immediate skill shortage, but how do we then tackle that medium term? And apprenticeships are a massive tool for getting people, especially into those jobs actually that are comparatively new jobs. They're sort of 20 years ago, you wouldn't be talking about retrofitting as a career necessarily. It would be loft insulation and these kind of things. So much more than that now. And so having a situation where you can go into good work, you don't have to, as you rightly say, have a degree that costs you a lot of money in terms of loans. You can have apprenticeship degrees as well. So for the more technical areas, we get some of the construction companies to sponsor people through the apprenticeship degrees as well. So it's a really important part of the mix.
I totally agree with Sandy's point about targets. You need to be able to measure them, and this is why I think if each home had its own passport, that would be a way to log what work had been done. And this goes, I can't emphasise this enough about the need to coordinate these various activities, work streams, because at the moment they're all in different silos, and we won't succeed unless we pull them all together. In terms of apprenticeships are at the core of what my members do. Most apprentices are trained by SME building companies So they're very committed to that. And to be fair to the government, there is a construction skills delivery group which has been looking at short-term measures. So the government's been working on flexible apprenticeships and boot camps to try and get more people into the construction industry, which is good. But actually, the longer-term point is we need quality apprenticeships. That over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen the value of the apprenticeship go down. The emphasis has been going to university and not valuing vocational training. We need to reverse that and to say, actually, there's no stigma attached to a vocational qualification. You are the future entrepreneurs. And my members very often have started on the tools and built up a company and have done extremely well. And it seems to me in the current economic climate, we should be strong advocates for those people who get on and do and build up a business.
Actually, can I just say that, because it's a really interesting one when we talk about vocational. I did a piece that ITV bumped into me in the conference yesterday, and they said they've been on the streets of Birmingham and they asked people, what one question would you like to ask ministers in conference? Number one was the question was, why is university education so expensive when my dad got it for free? And it is, but this mix that Brian's talking about is so important. You don't have to go to university to get a great qualification to get into career. You know, we push people through that. It's obviously there, and it's you know, we've got amazing universities, and you can have a great career through degrees, but it's just not the sole thing. And that's why Nadeem Zahawi, when he was Education Secretary, was talking about making T-levels just as famous as A-levels. It's that more vocational approach that we need.
Thank you very much. We'll have hands again, please. And I'll repeat my plea for concision, because I'm going to try and get 2 rounds of questioning in. We'll have the lady at the back there in the 3rd row with her hand raised there, and the gentleman in the back row there. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you. Tom Wooding, Mortgage Price Manager. Brian, quick question for you. You mentioned in your opening statement about stamp duty. Could I just get you to clarify what you was meaning by that? Was my understanding that you think long-term that stamp duty would be exempt for those properties that have had retrofitting, or that retrofitting can work in line with? So I didn't quite understand what you was trying to get across in that first message.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Megan Kenyon. I'm a reporter at the Local Government Chronicle. I just had a question about, obviously, we want to be building homes which don't need to be retrofitted. There was a question earlier about how we can support councils to ensure that's happening. But I wondered, obviously, building any energy-efficient homes is very expensive, but how do we ensure that we are building those homes without it coming at the cost of affordable house building as well? And I just wondered how you thought local authorities could be better supported to ensure that doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Tom, on the first point about stamp duty, I think we need to look at various ways stamp duty could be modified to encourage homeowners or prospective buyers to actually invest in the home itself. So obviously the point of sale is a good opportunity in terms of when you're going to upgrade the property. But I think in the immediate term, we're strong advocates of reduction of VAT to encourage homeowners to actually improve their homes. But the stamp duty one would be very happy to have a further discussion about what you think. You might think it's the best time to change the stamp duty rate. On the new homes, you were talking about the supply, really, about affordable homes. I mean, we've got a chronic undersupply of housing in this country. We just need to be building more homes. And part of the capacity issue is the fall in the number of SME house builders. It's dropped now to 10% of all new homes are built by SMEs. The larger house building contractors dominate the market. We need to open up that market. We need to encourage more local house builders to come into that market, which comes back to the planning points, looking to see a more flexible planning system, also particularly in relation to the allocation of land, which is a major problem. Because small builders very often can't find small sites of 2, 4, 6 houses.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Brian said. Actually, I totally agree with that in terms of work, and I also go back to in terms of the 100% about this transition. Because if you haven't got if you're bringing new SMEs or developing SMEs into the market, clearly they need to make sure they've got the technical ability, that they're training themselves up and getting the modern methods of construction that they're using including modular. We need far more modular house building if we're going to increase the supply, which, as you know, this government's all about supply side reform.
I think I'm more concerned about the stamp duty question is an interesting one, but I, speaking personally, find it extraordinary that we still have this issue around VAT on maintenance and retrofit, but not on new homes. And I think that is something we really ought to look at. Yes, MMC modular construction, that's obviously a solution. I'd like to pick up the point about energy efficient homes are obviously more expensive. I'm not sure that that needs to be the case, and there have been some very, very interesting, innovative projects. Some of them were highlighted at UK Construction Week earlier this year, where some really very clever construction methods were used to create energy efficient, very interesting looking properties, and they were delivered by very bold and very brave, back to Brian's point about SME. It was a small group who decided they were going to take on this challenge of providing energy efficient and attractive housing. And as an example of the bravery of this, it appeared that as they began the project, they discovered that there was a major power supply cable running across the site that had been identified. And the young man who was in charge of the project just organised a meeting with the power company, and instead of waiting 6 months and being charged a great deal of money for moving it, it was moved within 6 weeks at no charge. So I think there are some very interesting, we've got to be braver and bolder and give opportunities for the SMEs and the groups who can show a way of doing it, so that we can start counteracting the sense that, well, it's a nice to have, but it's too much. So I think there's some lessons to be learnt from these examples.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those last points. I think there's so much innovation and costs are coming down. I think also when we're talking about the costs, we have to think about the life cycle costs as well, because if local authorities are then in 5-10 years' time going to have to go and retrofit all those homes, then, you know, the cost will be a lot more. So we need to think about that. And also we need to think about the cost to the people living in those homes as well. We're in a gas crisis, and we're still connecting people to the gas grid right now. It makes no sense. So I think, yeah, affordability is absolutely key, but over what timeline? Because if we think longer term, then it is totally going to make economic sense. On stamp duty, I'd definitely recommend reading the UK Green Building Council paper on green stamp duty. They set out a variety of ways that stamp duty can act as a nudge to encourage people at the point of sale to retrofit their homes. I think the idea is basically that if after 2 years of purchasing the building, you've brought it to a certain level of EPC, then you would not pay the stamp duty. So it would act as an incentive in that way. I think essentially there's a... Sorry.
Sorry, no, go on. That's fine.
Yeah, I think there's different ways that you could structure it, but the idea would be that if after 2 years you hadn't retrofitted your home, you would then pay the stamp duty.
Thank you. Right, final show of hands. This is quick fire, because this will be the candidates' panel's closing comments as well. So we'll have the gentleman there and the gentleman there. I think that's the last 2 questions. So perfect. So we'll just send you both the one mic or the other microphones coming. Sir, go.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dave Blatchford from Bath. Greenspan is a small housing company. Why can we not let companies like ourselves have stamp duty off when we buy properties to retrofit? Because we have to pay stamp duty, which is quite high because it's a second property, which we have to pass on. So surely it would be more wise to give us the break on that, to allow us to do that, and that would deduct that cost of stamp duty off the cost of the house afterwards.
Thank you very much, sir.
I'm retrofitting my house with solar at the beginning of November, 4 kilowatts of solar panels, £5.5 grand. That will pretty much power my entire house, including heating. Yep. £60 billion is enough to retrofit half the housing stock with solar panels, fully fitted. What a waste of money just giving it to the energy market, doing nothing with it.
Thank you. So we're going to start with you. We'll just roll up the panel, and that will be the...
Yeah, I guess just to agree with both points, I think linking stamp duty to retrofit's a real no-brainer, and also agree, would love to see a rollout of solar across the country.
I agree too. I've got solar panels and I'm just about to put another array on, and I think we have to look back to your point, the classic model, which is when are you going to get your capital back, that's all changed dramatically now. Exactly. So the payback has changed, and also you need to look at how it enhances the value of the property when you hand it over. It's not just how much does it cost to get the money back. We need to think differently.
Minister?
Yeah, well, I suppose in terms of those, that comes back to the mix of houses and actually making sure that people are aware very much of those payback terms, those shorter payback terms. It's that education and inform as much as the investment is really crucial in the piece.
What about the gentleman's question about builders?
Well, stamp duty, look, I mean, I'll definitely take that back. Kwasi Kwarteng's a busy man at the moment, but I'm sure, you know, in terms of the tax simplification that you've been talking about, the wider, longer-term tax simplification, I'm sure stamp duty reform will be in there as well.
Yep, stamp duty break, obviously good news if we could take that back to the Chancellor. And then the other issue about solar panels, yes, but it does raise, you know, a wider question about the energy security of this country. We've now piled up huge debts which we're going to have to repay, and it's a shame that money couldn't have been done to actually reduce demand much earlier. But anyway, we are where we are, and so solar panels do offer a good solution there.
Thank you. That brings us to time. So I hope, first of all, everyone will join me in showing a show of appreciation for our panel. Thank you for being an excellent audience. Felt borne up by the excellent questions, so it's been a great panel. There's another day of Conservative Home events, so I hope we'll see you at some more of those. Have fun. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.